There is something quietly remarkable about people who grew up in the 1970s, and psychology is finally catching up to explain why. If you were a child during that decade, your brain developed during a rare psychological window in human history, a time before constant surveillance, before digital overstimulation, and before childhood became tightly managed. It was a period defined by freedom, responsibility, boredom, and discovery, and those who lived through it often sense that something fundamental has been lost, even if they can't always explain it. People who grew up in the 70s often look at the modern world with a calm detachment, not superiority, not bitterness, just quiet understanding. They experienced a childhood that shaped attention, emotional regulation, and independence in ways that are now increasingly rare. What follows are 8 psychological traits researchers frequently associate with those who grew up in that era. The first trait is self-directed problem solving. If you grew up in the 1970s, no one designed your day for you. There were no apps suggesting what to do next. When you said you were bored, the answer was simple: go find something to do. And you did. You invented games, explored neighborhoods, built things from nothing, read entire books out of curiosity, or disappeared on a bicycle for hours. Studies on unstructured childhood show that children who had to create their own entertainment developed stronger executive function, creativity, and internal motivation. Your brain learned how to generate purpose from emptiness, a skill modern childhood often bypasses. The second trait is calibrated risk awareness. You climbed trees that were probably too high. You played in the street. You rode bikes without helmets. You scraped knees, broke bones, and wore those scars like proof of survival. Developmental psychology shows that controlled physical risk during play teaches the nervous system the difference between real danger and manageable risk. You learn this through experience, not warnings. That's why, as an adult, you often remain calm during crises while others panic. Your system has already learned how to assess risk without shutting down. The third trait is comfort with solitude. You spent long stretches alone, not because you were isolated, but because there were no screens demanding attention every few seconds. You listened to full music albums, lay on the floor staring at the ceiling, or wandered outside with no destination. Pre-digital childhood research shows that people who grew up without constant stimulation experience less anxiety when alone with their thoughts. You learned early that boredom is not an emergency, silence is not a threat, and being alone does not mean being lonely. The fourth trait is analog patience. You waited for things. You waited for your favorite TV show at a specific day and time. You waited for cartoons to start on Saturday morning. You watched movies when they were scheduled, not whenever you wanted. You took photos and waited days to see if they even turned out. You memorized phone numbers and waited for someone to be home to answer. Research on delayed gratification shows that people who learned to wait early in life developed better impulse control, stronger relationships, and long-term resilience. Instant gratification rarely satisfies you because your brain was trained to value anticipation. The fifth trait is internal authority. You were given freedom before you were given explanations. You left the house in the morning and the rule was simple: be back when the streetlights turn on. No tracking, no constant check-ins. You had to evaluate situations, make decisions, and deal with consequences on your own. Psychology shows that unsupervised autonomy builds strong internal decision-making systems. This is why you don't need constant validation or instructions. You think critically and act independently even when guidance is absent. The sixth trait is emotional regulation through experience, not instruction. You weren't coached through every emotion. You weren't constantly asked how you felt. You learned emotional control by living, by dealing with conflict, disappointment, boredom, and joy in real time. Psychological research shows that experiential emotional learning builds resilience more effectively than constant verbal processing. You feel deeply, but you don't collapse under emotion. You regulate quietly. The seventh trait is resistance to constant stimulation. Your brain never became dependent on endless novelty. You can wait in long lines. You can sit without checking something. You can focus. Neuroscience shows that constant stimulation fragments attention and increases anxiety. Your mind developed before that wiring took hold. That's why your attention span feels intact, while others feel restless. The eighth and most defining trait is quiet competence. You don't announce what you can do, you simply do it. Independence, patience, emotional control, and resilience combine into something modern culture often misreads as detachment, but psychology recognizes it as competence. What looks like coldness is self-sufficiency. What looks like silence is depth. What looks like apathy is discipline. Beyond these traits, people who grew up in the 1970s also developed a natural tolerance for uncertainty. You lived in a world where not everything was explained, documented, or immediately answered. Psychology shows that tolerance for uncertainty is a major predictor of emotional resilience. Your brain learned that not knowing is part of life, not a danger signal. You also learned to think in narratives rather than fragments. You watched full movies without interruptions. You followed entire story arcs. Cognitive psychology shows this strengthens long-term memory and pattern recognition. You don't just react to moments, you contextualize them. Your learning was also embodied. It happened through movement, exploration, failure, and physical presence. Neuroscience confirms that embodied learning strengthens intuition and decision-making. That intuition you trust is not mystical. It is memory stored in the nervous system. And finally, your identity was formed without constant performance. You were not encouraged to define yourself publicly at every stage. Psychology shows that identities built through experience rather than validation are more stable. That's why constant self-labeling often feels unnatural to you. If you sometimes feel out of place in the modern world, remember this: you are not outdated. You carry psychological capacities that are becoming rare. You were shaped by a childhood that balanced freedom and responsibility in a way that history may never repeat. Now, I want to hear from you. If you grew up in the 1970s and recognized yourself in this video, comment 70s kid and tell us which of these traits describes you the most. Your comment helps others realize they're not alone and not broken. If you value research-based psychology that explains why you are the way you are, subscribe to Psych Archive X. This is just the beginning.